and his message was clear. Slavery was sin, and those who maintained it, criminals.
Hallelujah, it's done. I believe on the Son.
The abolition movement grew, inspired by passionate leaders. Harriet Tubman called Moses by the slaves who followed her north to freedom. Wendell Phillips named the Golden Trumpet of abolitionism for his oratory. And Frederick Douglass, the son of a slave and a white man.
I appear this evening as a thief and robber. I stole this head, these limbs, this body from my master, and ran off with them.
Douglass was so eloquent that skeptics charged he could never have been a slave. In part to prove them wrong, he wrote an autobiography, purchased his freedom with $600 obtained from English admirers, and returned to the struggle.
The abolitionists would raise the Negroes to a social and political equality with the whites, and that being effected, we would soon see the present condition of the two races reversed. They and their northern allies would be the masters, and we the slaves. John C. Calhoun.
More and more Southerners worried about the growing political as well as economic power of the North. Northerners were increasingly hostile to slavery. Still, most Southerners refused to acknowledge even the possibility of changing their way of life.
On the north bank of the Ohio, everything is activity, industry. Labor is honored. There are no slaves. Pass to the south bank, and the scene changes so suddenly that you think yourself on the other side of the world. The enterprising spirit is gone. Alexis de Tocqueville.
We are separated because of incompatibility of temper. We are divorced north from south because we hated each other so. Mary Chestnut.
On the clear moonlit night of November 7th, 1837, a mob surrounded a warehouse at Alton, Illinois, intent on destroying an anti-slavery newspaper run by the Reverend Elijah P. Lovejoy. When one of the mob moved to set the building on fire, Lovejoy, armed with a pistol, came out to stop him. The slavery men shot him dead and dumped his printing press into the Mississippi. The news stunned the nation. A white man had been killed over black slavery. Protest meetings were held throughout the North. One abolitionist wrote that thousands of our citizens who lately believed that they had nothing to do with slavery now begin to discover their error. In Hudson, Ohio, a clergyman told a church gathering, "The question now before us is no longer, can slaves be made free, but are we free, or are we slaves under mob law?" In the back of the church, a strange, gaunt man rose to his feet and raised his right hand.
Here before God, in the presence of these witnesses, I consecrate my life to the destruction of slavery. John Brown.
In 1846, a lawyer from Springfield, Illinois, was elected to Congress. He was born in Kentucky, the son of a farmer who could barely sign his name. He became a legislator at 24, a prosperous attorney, and after a turbulent courtship, the husband of Miss Mary Todd, the daughter of a slave-holding Kentucky banker. For Abraham Lincoln, the Declaration of Independence was to be taken literally. All men had the right to rise as far as talent would take them, just as he had. He detested slavery, but he called for its restriction, not immediate abolition. By mid-century, the country was deeply divided. Southerners feared the North might forbid slavery. Northerners feared slavery might move west. As each new state was added to the Union, it threatened to upset the delicate equilibrium of power.
There are grave doubts at the hugeness of the land and whether one government can comprehend the whole. Henry Adams.
Now events accelerated. In 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin. Its portrayal of slavery's cruelty moved readers as nothing else had. Queen Victoria wept over it, and within a year, more than 1.5 million copies were in print worldwide. In 1854, Congress allowed settlers in the Kansas and Nebraska territories to decide for themselves whether or not to permit slavery. Kansas exploded. 5,000 pro-slavery men invaded the territory. In the next 3 months, 200 men died in bleeding Kansas. The killing would not stop for 10 years. In 1857, the Supreme Court refused to free a slave, Dred Scott, even though he had lived for many years on free soil. Chief Justice Roger B. Taney said a black man had no rights a white man was bound to respect.
As a nation, we began by declaring that all men are created equal. We now practically read it, all men are created equal except Negroes. Soon, it will read all men are created equal except Negroes and foreigners and Catholics. When it comes to this, I should prefer emigrating to some country where they make no pretense of loving liberty. To Russia, for instance, where despotism can be taken pure and without the base alloy of hypocrisy. Abraham Lincoln.
Violence reached the floor of the United States Senate, where Congressman Preston Brooks of South Carolina savagely beat abolitionist Senator Charles Sumner with his cane. Southern sympathizers sent Brooks new canes. Members began carrying knives and pistols into the chamber. Meanwhile, the nation's chief executive, James Buchanan, did nothing.
A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure, permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall. But I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing, or all the other.
On Sunday evening, October 16, 1859, the radical abolitionist John Brown led 5 blacks and 13 whites into Harper's Ferry, Virginia. He brought along a wagon load of guns to arm the slaves he was sure would rally to him. Once they had, he planned to lead them southward along the crest of the Appalachians and destroy slavery. Brown was an inept businessman who had failed 20 times in 6 states and defaulted on his debts. Yet he believed himself God's agent on earth. In 1856, at Pottawatomie Creek in Kansas, he and his sons had hacked 5 pro-slavery men to death with broadswords, all in the name of defeating Satan and his legions. Brown and his men quietly seized the armory, arsenal, and engine house and took up hostages, including George Washington's great-grandnephew. After that, nothing went right. The first person killed was the town baggage master, a free black. The slaves did not rise up. Angry townspeople did. The first of Brown's followers to fall was Dangerfield Newby, a former slave. Someone in the crowd cut off his ears as souvenirs. On Tuesday morning, federal troops arrived from Washington, led by a U.S. Army Colonel, Robert E. Lee. Lee's men stormed the engine house, and 9 more of Brown's men were killed, including 2 of his sons. Brown, severely wounded, was turned over to Virginia to be tried for treason.
In firing his gun,